Hi there, and a very happy new year. Welcome to a BigLipz podcast. My name is Sam Macaulay Blair, and as ever, I am joined by the wonderful Kathryn Reese. The two of us are independent filmmakers who started up our own podcast, in case you can't tell from the video that you're watching. So we had a first series, for those of you that don't know, where we basically discussed all things movie related, and now we've moved on to the wonderful world of television. With this being the sort of first podcast of the new year of 2023, we thought we'd start by being a bit nostalgic and retrospective and looking back at our 2022. Funnily enough, this is also podcast number 22. So there's a whole lot of twos in the go here. So just to start off with, Kathryn, so 2022 for you, did you spend most of your time watching, keeping up to date with new shows, or did you use the year to kind of go back and watch a bunch of older stuff that had maybe been on your watch list for a while? What did you watch last year? Tell me all about it.
So basically, I didn't do either of the things that you said. Basically, what I did was the majority of the time rewatch old shows that I had already seen that got to the point that I didn't even particularly enjoy them. Um, so there's that, yeah.
Always fun.
But yeah, I feel like I slipped into such a bad habit this year of just like I kind of mention it later on, but where it's just not quite comfort, but ease of watching. Like we've spoken before about when you can't. It just becomes a habit to have something on in the background, and it almost seems like an effort to concentrate and fully have all of your attention on the one thing. Because we've kind of spoken about that before, where you have to make an actual effort to watch something and not sit on your phone and things like that, which is annoying, and that's all me. I feel like there are shows obviously that I was aware of that were coming out this year. There was a few that I did watch, but a majority of them were very much like, oh, that sounds good, and I'll need to watch that, but then never got around to watching it. There was some as well that we watched, or that I watched for the podcast, and even then, for example, House of the Dragon, I kind of started that as it was airing.
Yeah.
And then had to binge watch it before the podcast, and I couldn't even tell you why, because I was enjoying it.
Fair.
But yeah, it's definitely majority of the things I watched were things for reasons unknown, because obviously we both love film and TV, but it's almost like self-sabotage, where instead of watching something new that I'll enjoy that's something a bit different, I'm like, no, do you know what, I'll watch 19 seasons of Grey's Anatomy. Do you know what I mean? When it stopped being good at season 11. Do you know what I mean? But then it gets to that point where you've invested so much time in whatever trash it is that you're watching that it seems like a waste not to finish it. Grey's Anatomy is a really funny one as well, because I didn't watch it when it originally aired. I've never really been watching it as and when it aired, so I've constantly had spoilers through the years. And I feel like now no one's really talking about it, pretty much because it's terrible. That's what people generally are saying. The only kind of talking point of it now is that Meredith Grey, the show's namesake, is leaving. But that's yet another reason to stop watching. Why would you watch it?
Are they just gonna call it Anatomy?
Anatomy, yeah. Well, they changed the name of the hospital several times throughout the series, so maybe they'll just change the name of the entire series.
They should. I'd respect them if they did it.
That would be good. That would be a good idea, but they wouldn't. But yeah, I feel like, to my discredit, and it's almost like cutting off your nose to spite your face. For reasons unknown, even though I know that I would enjoy these things, majority of the stuff that I watched was either stuff I didn't particularly enjoy and didn't finish, or things I've already seen, which is very annoying. What about you?
I get it.
You tend to try and keep up with.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's weird because
like
2021, but obviously we were discussing movies, but I generally didn't watch, there was it wasn't a conscious effort to avoid TV, but it just so happened. I remember thinking that was probably the year where I watched the least amount of TV. I was more focused on watching movies, and I think just there weren't many shows on that I was fussed about keeping up with. So yeah, it just kind of
you watched Buffy and Angel.
No, that was 2020. So
Oh,
like that was 2020 I watched a good amount of TV because of like stuff like that. 2021 was just like pretty much movies that I watched. So yeah, there was just like I do remember thinking a couple of times I was like, yeah, I definitely haven't seen a lot of TV this year. And then 2022, it's like I've more than made up for that. And the thing is, like, I didn't. It was, it was. I didn't have some mantra at the start of the year to watch as much like TV as I could. It genuinely was just the case that there was like a bunch of shows on my radar that I was like, okay, I want to watch these things. When they're released and stuff like that. I'm looking forward to them. And it was kind of just like I'd never at any point sat down and actually looked or like written up a list of like all the stuff that was coming out that I was keen to watch, but it was a crazy amount. Like pretty much for most of the year, I think literally I'd have like 4 shows on at the same time. So every single week,
Oh.
I would have like 4 episodes of something coming out to keep up with, which doesn't sound like a lot, but then what happens is like, sometimes you're just busy and you don't have like the chance to, especially with like, as I finished my degree, sometimes you just don't have the ability to, keep up to date with everything. On top of that, obviously there was like films that I would watch. There was obviously like I'd go to the cinema, video games that I'd play. I did manage to have a social life to like some degree. And obviously there was like projects of my own that I was working on, and then obviously like stuff that we watched for the podcast as well. So there was like other TV shows that I, was watching that weren't airing. So it just like I wrote a list of which I will now read out. And I don't even think this is everything. I think there's stuff on this that I've missed out. And I will say as well, just there's a couple things on this that I've maybe seen like 1 or 2 episodes from. Or maybe like more. There's a couple in this there's a few in this that I like haven't finished. But there's also a few in this that I've watched like multiple seasons of. Okay. So I'm not gonna like know which ones are which because like it definitely like more than balances out or works out in like the favor of I've seen more than like this list probably lets on. But yeah, so last year I watched Squid Game, American Horror Story Coven, Atlanta, Halo, Our Flag Means Death, The After Party, Peacemaker, Diabolical, Doctor Who, Russian Doll, Clone Wars, Bad Batch, Rebels, The Mandalorian, Boba Fett, Kenobi, Andor, Tales of the Jedi. There's a lot of Star Wars in there.
There is a lot of Star
Wars. I only really realised while writing this. The Boys, Stranger Things, Dead Girls, Better Call Saul, The Rings of Power, House of the Dragon, Moon Knight, Ms. Marvel, She-Hulk, Inside Man, Midnight Club, Midnight Mass, The Haunting of Hill House, Rick and Morty, Human Resources, Big Mouth, Westworld, Time Traveler's Wife, Arcane, Sandman, The Devil's Hour, Cabinet of Curiosities, Jekyll, Red Dwarf, Fleabag, Spaced, Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, His Dark Materials, and What We Do in the Shadows.
Wow. That is a very hefty list.
Yeah, it's dense.
That's so funny. I think like, do you know when you were talking there, like, it just like a light bulb moment where I think part of the reason I haven't watched a lot is I do it with books as well. I like to just watch one series at a time.
Yeah. And
that's the TV series that I'm watching. And I do it with books as well. Like I can only read one book at a time. So maybe my New Year's resolution should be to, because I'm not, like, I can follow 2 different stories at one time. It's not like I switch from one to the other and I'm confused and I'm like, oh, but where's Christina Yang?
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a very impressive list.
Thank you very much. Honestly, I felt drained reading it, and like there was, I think it got to like towards the latter half of the year, and there was just points where I was like, man, I really need TV shows to stop coming out, because I'd be looking at like I'd just look at like the next few weeks, and it'd be like, okay, these shows, I'd be like, okay, these shows are about to wrap up, thank God. But then it would also be like, oh, but all these shows are also about to begin. So it's just like, there was always like an overlap as well. So yeah, it was mad. But I'd like, I'm kind of surprised that I made it through as many shows as I did. And yeah, I enjoyed a fair amount of them, which I guess brings me on to my next point, which is, what were some of your favourites that you watched last year? And this can be entire seasons or it can be like individual episodes.
So the first one I wanted to talk to is one that I've been watching and haven't told you about. And that's The White Lotus.
Okay.
Which I don't know if you've watched it, but
I haven't, no. I have like started to hear things about it. I've started to hear like people talking about it and like it getting, good word of mouth.
That's kind of why I started to watch it, because I had it was on my radar but not like on my watch list, and then it just kept popping up everywhere, and then my mum was talking about it, so I was like, right, I'll give it a go. And this was literally only last month that I watched it. So I've only watched the first season. The second season's out now. It's such a funny show. I would love for you to watch it, because it's really difficult to describe. Like, I was talking about it to other people, and they're like, what is it about? And I'm like, well, that's hard to say.
Yeah.
I feel like if I was to describe it, it's kind of like a kind of comedy drama about how awful rich people are and how they ruin it for everyone, kind of thing. But I feel like it looks great, like stylistically. The cast are amazing. But the thing that really shines is the writing. Like, it's just so well done. It's so nuanced, and they do a lot of like kind of social commentary and talk about like social political issues and things that are very in just now. But it does it in such like a natural way. Like, there's shows obviously that I'll talk about later on, that's just hitting you over the head with it, like with their like wokeness. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas this, and it's painful to watch, but this show is so cleverly done. Like, like I said, it just feels natural. Like, none of it feels forced. It's very clever as well. Like, it's kind of like a mystery. Like, the first episode reveals a fact, and then you go back and you watch the kind of unfolding. But the way that it's done is that initially, when you see the kind of aftermath of I don't want to go into too much detail, but when you see the aftermath of the mystery, you kind of have an assumption as to what's happened, and then the further it goes into the season, you're like, maybe that's not what happened, and then you have to try and figure out, but what did happen. Having said that, it got to the very last gasp before I figured out what happened. Like, as it was happening, I was like, oh my god, that's gonna happen. Which is always good, always fun when you're watching something.
Yeah, you kind of. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, I was gonna say it's a really funny one as well, because it's quite a slow burn, but it doesn't feel boring in any way.
Yeah.
But it's not like packed full of drama, and the episodes are like an hour long, but it just doesn't feel long and boring, which I think is key. And I think a lot of shows now as well have a tendency to just be really long. Like, movies went through a phase where they were all 2 to 3 hours long, just cause.
Yeah.
I feel like shows are kind of doing that a wee bit, but this feels like it needs to be that length. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, would definitely recommend The White Lotus.
Fair.
I only just finished the first season, so I'm buzzing to move on to the second season. The other one I wanted to talk about, and we've spoken about it in the podcast before, but at the time I hadn't finished it, so we didn't get to have a good proper discussion, and that is The Devil's Hour.
Yes.
I feel like when I was writing my notes for this, I was thinking about it, and I was like, so rarely has a show had such an amazing ending.
Yeah.
Like, I enjoyed the show all the way through, but then the ending was like, I was blown away by it. And it was the same. It was very clever writing, to the point where there was things like sprinkled all the way through. But I think we spoke about this at the time, but I really liked that it was quite, it didn't dumb it down for the audience. You weren't like a spoon-fed information, like oh, remember this for later. It was really cleverly done. And then obviously you mentioned that it's been renewed for 2 more seasons. Is that right?
Yeah, seasons 2 and 3. So it must have done very well, which is, especially right now, is very exciting to see, because now is not a good time for like TV renewals or TV show renewals.
Yeah, so I'm excited to see what they do with that. Because it felt like a very contained story. So I'm like, are they going to continue on that same path, or are they just going to continue with kind of like Peter Capaldi's character?
Yeah, I saw the ending as a bit of a cliffhanger, which I mean, spoilers for The Devil's Hour, where to me it was, the whole point was obviously it was then jumping to like another universe, and so it was kind of gonna like continue. To me, it was kind of like closing the door on like one sort of like contained universe and story, and then like opening the door to like another one, where Like I think there was a few like threads that I sort of saw as like quite loose, or like it did feel like they'd been left in like an interesting place for season 2 to basically like take things. So yeah, I think it's very much going to like continue. But it also did very much feel like, okay, they clearly have like a very strong plan for what they're going to do with season 2, and if they commission season 3, then obviously season 3 as well. I do hope it's one of those things that like I would quite like if it was like, okay, we've got 3 seasons and that's all we need, and we're going to like stop it there. I don't want it to be one of those things that like keeps, because there is obviously like you could do that with it being like multiple universes and stuff.
Yeah, there's like endless scope, isn't there, for it?
Yeah, exactly. But you don't want them. Yeah, you don't want them to like succumb to that, and then you're on like season 9 and you're just like, okay, this is getting absurd.
Yeah, exactly. Another one, you mentioned shows not getting renewed. One that I had to mention, of course, Westworld. Westworld. And this is the thing, obviously, we did a whole podcast on it, so I'll be brief. But we, I really enjoyed it at the time. I didn't like season 3 as much, but I don't know whether I'm doing that thing now where, in hindsight, because it's been cancelled, I'm like, God, that show was absolute peak, like, TV. Do you know what I mean? Like, the first season I would agree with. The second season was good. Third was terrible, but the fourth season I felt was really good. I argued my case at the time. Yeah. So yeah, Westworld was another one I wanted to mention briefly.
Last time we can mention it, so fair.
Yeah. I do apologise, there's a lot of overlap between previous podcasts, but I'm trying to keep new points. Another one that I spoke about during the animation podcast was Bob's Burgers. And this is something that I started watching from the beginning again last year, and I was absolutely rewarded for it. I feel like it's maybe one of those shows that you kind of need to watch in a bit of a bulk.
Yeah.
Because it's such a weird, hilarious show. Like, there's things that happen in it, but they're presented in the show as normal. So like once you've watched a few episodes, you kind of get into it and you're like, oh yeah, that's just like the wacky world of Bob's Burgers. But it's so funny. Like, there are bits that I think about sometimes just randomly and I start laughing at them because that's how funny they are. So I feel like that's always the gauge for how funny something is if you laugh about it when you're not watching it.
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, I feel like that is criminally underrated in my opinion. Everyone I speak to hasn't watched it. So it's my new mission, is to get everyone to watch Bob's Burgers.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I'm just on like season 7 just now, so I'm firing through the episodes so that I can get to watch the movie as well, which I'm sure will be good.
Is that released? That has released,
yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's on Disney Plus. And then another 2 I just wanted to mention that were a little bit of a surprise. One of them was House of the Dragon. I didn't even think I was going to watch it at the time.
Yeah.
Like when it was kind of, because we spoke about that, we saw those on-set photos and things. But I was surprised at how much I liked it, and especially like the kind of latter half of it where it was when the time jump had happened.
Yeah.
I really, really enjoyed that. So again, looking forward to that season. And then the other one, of course, was Arcane, which is not something I would have watched ordinarily, which I think is why it made the list.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was something different. But yeah, so thank you. That was your choice, so thank you for that. It's something that I wouldn't have seen that I did thoroughly enjoy.
Thank you. I mean, it was one that I hadn't seen either, and I'd just seen, again, good word of mouth, and a friend suggested it, and I was like, okay, well, I thought it would make for an interesting podcast, and I'm glad it ended up being good as well, because there's always that fear where you go into something and you're like okay,
the Midnight Club.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, and that was a while ago. We discussed Arcane as well. Yeah, I really like your picks, and I like the fact that, I mean, it makes sense, especially given like the stuff that we've covered over the past year. But I like the fact that there's like a mix of like premium like sort of shows, but then you also have like animation, or adult animation, and yeah, it's just there's a nice sort of like range that you've got on the go. And then yeah, I dig your choices, and it's nice to see so many like the podcast ones mentioned. I pretty much went out of my way to just like not include podcast stuff because I was like, well, we've already talked about it. I actually did have the Devil's Hour in mine as well, because I also was just like blown away by how strong it was, and how it took like fairly cliched sort of ideas and like premises and stuff, but then like just twisted them in a really interesting way, and like takes these different genres and manages to merge them in like a really, really interesting and sort of satisfying way. So yeah, that one was like a big surprise for sure, especially because like there was a number of shows going into like the Halloween period where they were on my radar, and that was definitely the one that I was like, I'm pretty much just watching this because Stephen Moffat's produced it and Peter Capaldi's in it, and I don't really have any hopes for this being like that great. I'm probably going to watch an episode and be like, okay, that's enough of that. Whereas like other shows around the same period, I was a lot more excited for, and it ended up being my favourite of the lot. So that was a nice surprise. Another one that we've not done a podcast on, but I've mentioned numerous times, and that's Better Call Saul. Was just like absolute, again, probably the best thing I watched all year. The final season absolutely delivered and was just like TV production on a whole new level. It blows me away just like how good it was. Some other stuff I wanted to shout out was Atlanta, which again I've talked about before. That had 2 seasons on this year, seasons 3 and 4, bizarrely after not being on the air for like a good few years. And now it's wrapped up. I've still got like 2 episodes to watch before I'm finished with it, because season 4 like finished not that long ago, and as mentioned, I've just got like mountains of TV to watch. But of what I've seen of it, there's been some like absolutely great, it's been really, really strong. It's been a bit different than the first 2 seasons, but they've done some interesting stuff, and I kind of like some of the moves they've made with it. Another one I believe I've mentioned before, I did in my list, was The Boys, which is just, it like surprises me. I keep expecting it to just get bad. I keep expecting it to just like suddenly stop being on the level that it's on. Like every time it comes back and every episode I watch it, I'm like, okay, they're going to do something really daft this time, or it's just not going to work, or it's going to be predictable, especially since it like obviously utilizes the superhero genre. But I think it's so good at the sort of satire that it's doing, but also it's just really, really well written, and the acting in it's phenomenal, and it's just really good at like delivering. It can be really funny. It can, it has these like really shocking moments of sort of like madness, and comedy. It can be like really, really witty and funny, and then at the same time it can also be like really, really, there's like a surprising depth to the characters, and it takes them in like genuinely like unexpected directions, but always like really fulfilling directions as well. Like always feels, by the end of the season you're like, I should have seen a lot more of that stuff coming than I did. So yeah, a lot of love for The Boys. On the tangent of superhero shows, Peacemaker was another one where way back at the start of the year I had like no real interest in watching it, because I saw the Suicide Squad and I was like, yeah, that was fine, and John Cena was definitely not a part of that movie. I didn't really have any love for his like part in that. I've never really loved seeing him in anything. He just kind of turns up, and if anything I kind of like grown a little bit. But then he was outstanding.
There's John Cena playing John Cena again.
Yeah, exactly. But then he was really good in the show, and the show itself was just like such a delight. James Gunn absolutely killed it with it, and yeah, like it was. I ended up watching it with a friend, and that's pretty much the reason I watched it. But right from episode 1, we were both like, okay, this is very good, and I managed to like, sustain that. And then the last one I wanted to mention, again. Last one of the ones that came out last year that I wanted to mention, just because again I wasn't expecting it to be any good, was Andor, the Star Wars show. Which,
do you know, I heard a lot of that. I think people were maybe starting to get a little bit fed up because like The Mandalorian and Boba Fett and that came out in such quick succession, and I'm sure Kenobi wasn't massively, amongst the people at my work that watched it anyway, wasn't massively well received.
Most people had a lot of issues with Kenobi, and I see why, and I kind of agree with it. But at the same time, I like have such a love for the prequels just from being a kid and loving them. I'm very aware that they're like incredibly flawed. I don't like ever really watch them anymore, but they still like hold a place in my heart just because of like utter nostalgia. And Kenobi for me was just like, the whole time I was just like, it's the 10-year-old in me is so happy to just be having these actors back on screen, and seeing like a story that I just never thought would ever be told. So yeah, I had a lot of love for Kenobi, but I was also very aware. Whenever I was reading criticisms of it, I was like, yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
But also, I don't care. And also, the thing that I found funny about it was like, okay, yeah, it had its problem, and this isn't, this is not me defending the show, but people complained a lot about like the writing, and that's it's always fair to do that. But I was kind of like, at the same time, it's still better than the writing of the
Than the
prequels.
movie.
So it's
Yeah.
it's still a step up, like writing wise. So I'm not really going to complain because it's still like the best written we've ever seen this character. So yeah, but even then, like going into Andor, I didn't. Rogue One was my favorite of the new Star Wars films. But I just didn't. I had no part of me was like, oh man, that Cassian Andor guy. What was he up to before the film?
Yeah, I don't even. I think I'm pretty sure I've seen Rogue One, and I don't even know who he is as a character.
That's the thing. He's pretty like bland and forgettable in the film. And then they announced it was going to be like 12 episodes as well, which is like double the length of most of their like Star Wars series. So I was like, okay, that's a lot of that's like twice as much of a character that I care like a fraction of the amount about.
Yeah.
So I just kind of wasn't going to touch it, to be honest. It started and I was like, there was so many other things that I was watching. I was just like, yeah, I'm good at Andor. You can. They had the audacity as well to drop 3 episodes at once. So I was just like, right, you're not doing yourself any favors in my book.
Yep.
And then everyone
was that
sorry.
John Favreau as well?
No, it was Tony Gilroy who did he wrote Rogue One, and I think he also wrote like the Bourne movies as well. But yeah, it just turned out to be like a surprisingly strong show. Like it seemed like a really sort of like mature and sensible evolution of what a lot of Star Wars, what Star Wars really should be. It is a really sort of good thriller. You actually do feel like the Empire are a threat, and because you're watching someone that's not in any way connected to like the Force and stuff like that, you do kind of get the sense that like, okay, this character is vulnerable.
That's a good point.
They're
that's funny that they. It's just that thing that we kind of spoke about before. I can't remember which podcast, but like if the threat is continually there and continually the same threat, it's not much of a threat.
Exactly. But no, they did a really good job of like feeling that that the stakes were real. Even I think as well, because there are characters in it that are going to make it out, but you also kind of know so little about them that you're like, okay, but bad stuff can still happen, and there's a lot of time to go between. Plus, it introduces so many other characters and makes you care about them as well, that you are like, okay, well, these characters, I don't know what happens to, so like they're definitely in danger, and the show does kill characters off. It does have bad things happen to them. So yeah, it was a very intelligently written and directed show, and yeah, performances were great, and I think despite being 12 episodes long, it does this really interesting thing where like, and it makes sense with them releasing the first 3 episodes, where they like structure it in like threes. So you have these like sort of mini arcs that take place, and obviously there is like an overarching story, but you just kind of have these like a beginning, middle, and end, while the story's like ongoing, and that I think really helped it, because I ended up kind of binging it in like 2 halves. I watched like the first 6 episodes and then the second 6 episodes, and it worked really well for the show, I thought, because you just had a lot. It built momentum really quickly, but then paid it off really quickly as well. So it always felt like, okay, I want to watch more, because it's doing a really good job of like delivering every time. So yeah, of the shows that came out in 2022, those were my favourites. One last thing I'd probably shout out is, I wasn't crazy on Cabinet of Curiosities, but did you watch episode 7?
Yes.
And what were your thoughts?
I watched it in 2 halves. I got up until they snorted the coke, and I was like, this seems like a good point to take a break. So in that sense, it was helpful for me, because it was getting late.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was, yeah. It definitely, there was, I appreciate, like, kind of, obviously we are both big fans of The Thing.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the kind of like body horror aspect of it. I feel like it was very much lacking for the majority of it. And then I noticed I don't know whether maybe it's just because I was watching it or it was on the telly recently, but there was very much like Indiana Jones vibes at one point when that guy's face melted and then the other guy's head exploded.
I'm with you there.
Yeah, I just feel like for me, it felt a bit like nothing.
I
Do
know
you
what
know
you
what I
mean.
mean? Like
Like, I
that's very
think
scathing, but
no, like I know what you mean because I mean, I absolutely adored it. Like it just so caught me off guard when I was watching the series, because it's so stylized and so different from the rest of it. That was the one that I actually, because I've talked before about Cabinet of Curiosities, I think, and I think I said like a lot of the episodes are kind of just like the same thing. There's a lot of repeated like themes and ideas and similar sort of characters and similar like messages, and then that one was just like so different. That was what I
yeah,
wanted from it. I wanted like really stylistic individual episodes because again, I always think horror's so good for, for being, you can do so much with horror. You can do so many interesting things.
so horror
And
works really well short form as well. Like,
exactly. But I will say, like, it is. I would have liked more to happen because it is mostly just them in a room talking and taking drugs.
yeah,
So I would have liked a bit more to have happened. But yeah, no, like for me, it was, and I was very interested in you watching it. I'd obviously preferred you had no warning going in because I had
yeah,
kind of no warning going in. But yeah, and I just think it's like such a distinct. And again, I didn't think you'd particularly enjoy it, but I thought like it's such an interesting like singular watch that it like
yeah.
it justified the whole kind of series for me. Um,
Funnily enough, it got to a point when they were about to start taking the drugs, so where I was like, "Oh, is this gonna step into kind of like Legion territory?" Like that's kind of where I thought it was
yeah,
going, like a crazy like psychedelic drug trip. And then it did not go there. It went somewhere vastly different.
yeah, I know, but it does really lean into like yeah when it goes for like the horror or the horror stuff when it goes wild, it goes wild.
Yeah,
But yeah, no,
very true.
I had a lot of love for it, and I kind of knew that I kind of expected I was going to really like that one because I knew that it was from, I can't remember his name, but he directed a film called Mandy, which if the viewing isn't for you, then Mandy won't be for you.
Okay,
But
fair.
I really dug Mandy, so I was very much there for his Cabinet of Curiosities episodes.
Fair.
Um, yeah, so as mentioned, I did watch some like older shows as well as like just the new ones that came out last year. So that was my list of like shows that came out last year that I really enjoyed.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like I absolutely owe it to you to talk about a show that you've wanted to discuss forever that I finally watched in its entirety last year, and obviously
Oh,
one of the things I enjoyed the most last year was Midnight Mass, the Mike Flanagan series. No, I mean I'm joking. I mean that is also on my list, but The Haunting of Hill House, which yeah you've been singing its praises.
literally since we met.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, no, I mean I started talking to you as I was watching it, and then I was like, actually I'm going to hold off and bring this up in the podcast. And yeah, no, it really I can see why it gets all the love that it does. It's just so incredibly well made.
Yep.
It's like structured in such an interesting way where obviously it focuses on like the individual characters, and it's so good at delivering like these sort of twists and turns, and like having horror really well integrated, and have it like yeah the whole thing is like a really good like character study, but also there's like some genuinely great scares that builds tension really well. There's some like really like interesting and like incredible filmmaking. There's like what is it, episode 6, where they're in it's
Oh, the
the
long takes.
yeah, and it's
That
like
was
yeah, it's just
amazing.
exactly the first one goes on for like 20 odd minutes, and there's stuff like it pans around at one point and there's like kids as like the actors, and then it pans back and it's stuff like that. It's just
Mm-hmm.
blew my mind.
Do you know that way when I was watching that particular episode, I was like sweating at the thought of the thought that had gone into that, all the planning that they would have to do, the run throughs, and oh, so much work.
Exactly. Like, and they didn't need to do it, but yeah, it's such an interesting way to make like what is like a very sort of small scale episode. But
Mm-hmm.
there's still, there's a lot of like drama because it's the first time you have like all of them sort of like together, and yeah, but to use that to then like have just to add that flourish, I was like, okay, like so much respect for them doing that. And I'm curious, like if that was like conceived at the very beginning, or if that was just like after they kind of looked at the script, it was then like okay, no, we actually could do this in like just you know, like it was like 3 or 4 like takes, and that's
It
like
was
the whole thing.
insane.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember I was watching it with my bestie at the time. Obviously, she's like we were both enjoying it, but every 2 seconds I was like, "They're still not cut yet. They're still not cut."
Yeah, I kept thinking, I kept like at points I'd be like, wait, have they cut and I've missed it? Because like this is such a long shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's movement and stuff in it, and just the whole it's even bits like this bit where one of the characters goes to like sit down in a chair and falls, and I think that's like towards the end of the take, and I was like, oh, that's mad that they even like
Yep.
attempted to put that in there. Never mind actually getting it right, getting it in there and getting it right, because stuff like that. I was just like, yeah, that's it. I do want to think about how much time it took, but I kind of
Yeah.
at the same time like kind of want to. I'm glad that I have some distance from it because it must have been a sweaty day on set. And poor Steadicam
imagine.
operator, he must have been like trembling by the end of it.
Their back would have been breaking.
Yeah, exactly. They probably had like a Steadicam operator for the Steadicam operator to like support them, double rigged.
It's so true.
I need to look at the behind the scenes pictures, but yeah, and obviously you've mentioned multiple times there being like a jump scare in there. I'm guessing it's the one in the car.
Yes.
Yeah, because like
So good. Did it get you?
Yeah, of course. It was. It's because I think there was like a jump scare earlier on in the series, and it was like quite a good one. And I was like, oh, I wonder if that's it, because that was like quite well done, but it wasn't like. And then the car thing happened. I was like, nope, that's got to be it.
That was
because,
it.
like,
100%.
there's just no way that you could be prepared for it.
Nope. And I loved it as well because, like you were saying, there were kind of scares in there, but it was so much of it was like tension building.
Yeah.
That for it to all be released in that one moment, oh, it was so good.
Yeah, absolutely. No, yeah, I was very much worth watching, and very much also worth the wait. Weird enough, I think I did say this to you because obviously we watched the Midnight Club, and then I watched Midnight Mass, and then I watched Haunting of Hill House, and I think just like I kind of started Haunting of Hill House before, and it wasn't that I wasn't enjoying it; it just wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't connecting with it on quite the same level, and it wasn't blowing me away as much as I thought. But watching it now and watching it last, and kind of having like an understanding of Mick Flanagan and his writing, it actually was like really rewarding to watch like his first proper series, and like the first like acclaimed Netflix one, and really like just still be blown away by it, still be like so utterly impressed by someone who's like I was then like familiar with their writing style and their work. And even just stuff like, again, just really, it does a lot of really long takes, but stuff like, there's a lot of really long monologues in his shows, and it really impressed. The thing that really impresses me is the fact that like he doesn't rely on, like, he will just like slowly zoom in for like what seems like minutes of a character talking and telling this really long story. And there's no like cutaways. There's no like, we're gonna insert some like just some like added footage of like what what they're talking about to like emphasize it. It just has complete faith in like the actors and the words, and the viewer's ability to connect with that and not be like bored. So yeah, like that's another thing that I just like so impressed me. And the way that he like does weave this really like intricate story and ties everything together in like such an interesting and satisfying way that is like you can't really see it coming. But it's just it does feel like it's so like well constructed. So yeah, a lot of love for Hill House.
Glad to hear it.
Yeah.
I'm spreading the gospel.
You're doing the Lord's work. Out of curiosity, did you finish Midnight Mass? Because I know you watched that. I know you started it.
No, funnily enough, I will discuss that later on at a different point.
Fair enough.
But yeah,
Fair.
I started it. I haven't finished it yet.
Fair. Well, yeah, I'll leave that for another point then. Cool. So moving on. Obviously, we just discussed the highs. Now I feel like it's only fair to discuss the lows. Kathryn, what are some of the shows or individual episodes that you watched that you just didn't quite vibe with? I'm expecting the viewing to be on there.
So, one of a show that I had a lot of issues with and I didn't finish it was the I can't remember his name now, that's terrible, but the Dahmer program.
Yeah.
Ryan Murphy. I had a lot of issues with that show, but not least of all the fact that I don't want to get too into it because it turns very political and not about the show, but it felt very much like they were glamorizing
Yeah.
like Dahmer as a person when he like it's just a really simple way to do it would have been to focus on the victims. Do you know what I mean? Like it takes away from him, from glamorizing him, from like because then
Well, the
it's a slippery slope. There's like always those weird people that like admire serial killers. Do you know what I mean? You don't want to pander to those people with shows like this, and shows are so massive on Netflix.
Yeah.
Sorry,
and there
what were
was
you gonna say?
I was just I mean there's a couple of things I was going to say just already jumping off things that you'd raised because there was I mean just going off of like the popularity like it's one of the Netflix's most watched shows. Like was there not loads of people that went as Dahmer for Halloween?
Yeah, they
Which
were selling like glasses and things like
someone
some
bought
people like yeah,
like
like
the
I
actual
did
glasses,
have
didn't
glasses similar to that, like that were just my at home
they?
reading
Yeah.
glasses, and then but people were buying them for like for the costume. I didn't know
Yeah.
that someone had bought his actual glasses.
Yes, someone then, but they paid like
dangerous.
a lot of money as well. I think it was like they spent like a few thousand on his like actual pair of glasses. So yeah, it does kind of like instigate like yeah, it does kind of inspire not niceness in
Yeah.
people
I
and
think as well
society.
someone whose victims' families are still alive, like
Well,
do
that
you know what I
was
mean? It would be different if it was someone like Jack the Ripper. Do you know what I mean?
yeah.
Because
Well, that was that was the other point I was going to say was like because you mentioned about the victims and stuff, and one of the things I read before the series dropped. Which was part of the reason I didn't watch it. I mean, I didn't need an extra show to watch anyway, but it was really big. So part of me would have been tempted to give it a go, but yeah, I read that apparently Ryan Murphy I think met with like the victims' families and they were just like, don't make the show, like please don't make the show. Like they genuinely
yeah,
like they actively came out and they were like, please do not make this show, and then they did it anyway. And then the fact that it obviously became such a hit, like you just don't want to think what that must have been like for them to have
yeah,
like actively pushed against it and then see just like yeah it become like popular and again like we were saying like people dressing up as like Dahmer for Halloween and stuff and yeah it must have been and must still be pretty horrific for them
yeah.
to just have that added to like the tragedy already there.
Exactly. Ryan Murphy has in the past in American Horror Story he's like flirted with the idea of almost like glamorizing them. Like in Hotel
Yeah.
they have this kind of like murderers club, and then there's like Dahmer's there, and the Night Stalker and people like that, and they're very much like presented as like, oh, you would wish that you were at this dinner, where that's just not appropriate.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, so yeah, to avoid going on any more of a tangent, one last thing I wanted to say though, which I thought was quite funny, is I think I've said this before as well, but my dad will watch any old garbage on film, TV, like he watches it all, and he's pretty like, yeah, it was good or it was bad, but this is one of the few shows where he actually was like, no, I didn't like it, I didn't agree with it. He agreed with us that it seemed to be glamorizing him, that we were meant to feel sorry for him.
Nice.
So yeah,
Respect.
I thought that was funny. Not funny, but you know. On a very different note, another one, and admittedly, I did not have high hopes for this, but I was somehow still let down, and that was And Just Like That, which was
I
like
don't
the sequel
even know
series
what that
to.
is.
It's the sequel series to Sex and the City.
Oh, okay. Didn't know that happened.
Sex and the City was, I really like it, right? But it is very dated. It came out in like the kind of late 90s, and it's very 90s.
Well, yeah, it kind of like defined a lot of the 90s, didn't it?
Yeah, and it like definitely like broke ground in
Yeah.
terms of like TV and female characters and things like that. But And Just Like That was, oh, do you know how I said earlier about the White Lotus being really clever and nuanced? And Just Like That was the exact opposite. Like
Love that.
like they had like in the show there are issues. It's a weird one to talk about because Sex and the City there are obviously issues in that, but it was shot and set at a different time.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that they're trying to kind of correct that, but the way that they're doing it is pathetic, and it's very much like almost like getting out like their script, like, oh, episode 3, remember when we did that? That was bad.
Oh,
And here's how we're
God.
gonna correct it. So yeah, it was just so full of like, yeah, I don't even know the term, but it was awful. And they like, I don't know. I assume you don't really know much about Sex and the City, but they built
No.
up the entire show, which I think was 6 seasons, and then an entire movie with like Miranda and Steve as a couple, and the whole first movie is them kind of reconciling and whatnot. So you've invested so much time in Miranda and Steve, and then literally 2 episodes into and just like that, she's like, nah, I don't love you anymore. Sorry, see you later. Like, like people love Steve. Why would
Yeah.
you? But what they did was that they yeah, it was just awful.
Yeah, it sounds like a sequel series that just didn't need to be made on like multiple levels. Like it sounds like there was
Yeah.
closure for the characters, for like the world, and on top of
Yeah,
that, like you said,
they had 2 movies as well, one of
yeah,
which was certainly not needed. Do you
yeah,
know what I mean? Like it had been wrapped up time and time again.
yeah. No,
Um,
yeah. It's yeah. We do live in like the era of legacy sequels, so I guess like all of these things are kind of inevitable. Like everything, well, it's a matter of time before like everything gets a legacy sequel at this point, and
yeah,
most of them are very, very like ineffective. And yeah, like I think as well when it's something like you say is such a part of like that time period. Like I haven't. I think I've mentioned this before. I haven't really seen Friends. I've seen like the first season and then like odd episodes, but like I've not really seen much of it. But I feel like I'm very glad that they've never done. You know, I, Friends are coming back. We're bringing Friends back, and because
yeah.
it's it was such a big part of the 90s, that it couldn't
It should
not
just stay
feel out of
there.
place. Yeah, exactly. It just wouldn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Now, like yeah, just because it's such a big part, it informed such a big part of like that culture. So yeah, I just don't think there's like a right way to. It would just be like near impossible to bring it back and have it like deliver and
Yeah,
not just like annoy a corner of the fan base effectively because it's also such a big show.
yeah,
But yeah, I imagine it was always going to be the same for Sex and the City.
yeah. And it was something like I really liked the show. Um, so when you heard that they were, first of all, Kim Cattrall wasn't coming back, so they was like, why would you? That would be like Friends, and they didn't have Rachel. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
the show was about those 4 women, and you're doing it with 3. Like that's like red flag number 1. But yeah, not would not recommend. I don't imagine that you're
fair.
rushing out to watch it, but
Wasn't top of my list, but
another one. I don't know if you'll agree with this, and it's. I think you won't be surprised, but it was Rings of Power.
okay.
um,
Did
I
you watch
didn't.
that?
Well, I didn't. I wasn't planning on watching it because I'm not a fan of. I don't like to say I'm not a fan of Lord of the Rings because then people start attacking me.
So
So
this is a safe space, but I will judge
yeah,
you.
they're just not my cup of tea.
Yeah.
And then I was kind of sitting there while my fiance was watching the first episode, and I was like, do you know what? This is like it was enormous in scale, and I was like, maybe there's something here. I could kind of I'd seen the movies maybe once or twice, so I kind of could be like, is that Kate Blanchett? Or do you know what I mean? Like I could kind of suss out who people were. But Lord above, man, it just it was just so long, and the thing that I liked about it in the beginning that it was so sprawling was the thing that I hated. Like it was just so long and sprawling, and there were some characters like the really boring elf guy. Like, why was he getting so much screen time? I don't care
Yeah.
about him and his weird bastard child. Like, yeah. And
No,
then they cut to the dwarfs, and that was unbearable in itself. So yeah, not for me.
I again, I think I had like more love for this series than a lot of people did. Funnily enough, I remember watching the first 2 episodes. I think just after I'd seen the first maybe 2 episodes of House of the Dragon, and I remember actually saying to someone, I was like, I actually am very surprised, but I preferred Rings of Power, the first 2 episodes of Rings of Power, to the first 2 episodes of House of the Dragon. I was more interested in Rings of Power,
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
more sort of like surprised, yeah. But then like House of the Dragon ended up utterly eclipsing it, and I did still like Rings of Power. Like when I finished it, I was like, that was actually a lot stronger than I thought it was going to be. I think it's weird because I remember thinking this a lot while I was watching it. And I think like the individual scene writing could be really strong, which sounds like a really weird thing to say. Like it was really good at having like, and it would be hard to do this without actually like pulling up like moments of the show and referencing exactly what I mean. But there's like moments where it kind of like it feels like it's doing a really cliched thing. It like will start. It will like imply that it's going in like a sort of tropey, cliched direction. Like just that individual scene. Um, yeah, like I think there's one scene where one of the characters is he's like having there's like some antagonism between him and like the local people who don't like he's like a foreigner and he's like walking free or something. And then they do that whole thing where they're like being like faux polite to each other, I think, and but like there's tension there, and you know that one of them is gonna like react first, and it's probably gonna be him, and he's gonna like hit the other one or whatever, and then he just like walks away, and I was like, okay, well that was actually like, you know, once upon a time that would have been like the boring obvious way for it to go, but now we're so used to it being like, you know, the scene was set up in such a way that you knew where it was supposed to go, and then they did it. They took it in a different direction, and it has like a lot of moments like that where like the end, the scene does end in a really sort of surprising way, and it kind of goes against the grain of how scenes are normally written. But at the same time, I think like the overall show just didn't feel as like substantial as it should have, and I think like again like when you describe the individual storylines, they're not that dull. They have like a lot of like all of them had like moments that I thought were interesting and worked. But I think I don't know. I think there was maybe just a bit of like I don't even want to say lack of cohesion because it did bring things together quite nicely. But it just kind of felt a bit like you said sprawling, and a bit aimless, and I think a bit disjointed. And I think as well like it kind of lacks. One thing that made me appreciate more about the Lord of the Rings is that it has such like the whole story has this like momentum. Because it's all about them going like traveling somewhere to destroy something that there's just a very obvious like we need to take this thing over there, so it's like set up to be an adventure, and you don't then ever have to justify why they're like going to these places and doing these things, because it's always like you're always aware of like the stakes and the momentum, and then obviously you have like antagonism behind them and in front of them, so like yeah, it just works really well within that universe. It's a really natural way to sort of like roll out the universe and expand and explode it. Obviously, this TV series had to do like the entire trilogy's worth of story and more, so like they had a lot, but because it was like individual characters doing their own thing, and a lot of it was like, okay, there's evil rising, but it was exploring how that's happening and stuff. It just didn't have that same. I felt like it really missed the momentum that the Lord of the Rings has. Sorry, that was a lot.
Fair. No, I had run out of things to say about it, so fire in.
Oh,
sorry.
No, I'm not going to say anymore.
No, I was going to say, I'm sure there are a lot more that I can't think of now. The obvious one is the newest season of Grey's, but I've spoken that to death.
Fair.
But yeah, those are the ones that stuck out in my mind as being particularly bad.
Fair enough. And I respect the choices. I think they're very interesting picks. Dammer and Rings of Power being on the same like category is just very interesting, especially because both of them were like wildly popular in their own way. And again, I completely get your points. So mine are like probably less interesting. I think the top of my list was the Halo TV series, which me and a friend watched the first episodes and went from like despising it really quickly to like laughing at just like there was just like something hilarious about the way that it was done, how serious it sort of took itself, and how sort of ridiculous it was. So we were like on board with being this like, okay, this is like entertainingly like bad, like, so we're here for it. We watched the whole first episode, got halfway through the second, and we were like, okay, no, this is actually just excruciatingly bad.
That's so funny because when you were reading out your list, I was like, I don't remember you ever mentioning Halo. Now it's making sense why.
No, it quickly like rose and fell, crashed and burned. It just, for
I
one
love that
thing,
as well, because it's not something that I would likely to have watched, so you wouldn't need to warn me against it.
No, even people that I know that might have like cared about Halo at one point, I didn't even like say anything to them because I was like, I don't think this show is really on anyone's radar. I don't think anyone cares about it. I don't think anyone really expected much from it. But yeah, I think from what because I kept it up with like I always keep my eye on reviews and stuff like that. I think there was some like there were some great moments from what I saw later in the series, but I'm just like, I don't have it in me to even
Yeah.
like finish the second episode. To be honest,
I feel like the first goal of writing something is that you want people to, you don't want it to feel like a chore, generally.
exactly. It's just, I mean, the biggest thing that I just couldn't get like my head around and couldn't get comfortable with was, you have the Master Chief, who is this like iconic, like helmeted protagonist, and they insist on the first episode of having him take his helmet off, and then, which, like, I don't mind them showing you the guy under the helmet, like that pretty much inevitable. Mandalorian did that, but it's the fact that like pretty much every scene from then onwards is him just like as a guy. So, and already the writing and the way that the universe was like constructed and stuff in the show didn't feel anything like the games. So that just really added to the whole thing of like, it just didn't feel like watching a Halo TV series. It just felt like
Yeah.
watching a really bad sci-fi show. So it just, even then, like any attachment I have to like the IP, just, yeah, that couldn't keep me interested.
That's
and I
not
think
great, is it?
exactly, especially coming after, like, we have the Mandalorian, which you don't really, you have Pedro Pascal, who's a more famous actor than the guy who's playing Master Chief, and he keeps the helmet on for the most part. You have like Halo 4.
Why wouldn't you build the intrigue? Because the minute they take their helmet off their face isn't half as interesting. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly, and he literally just looks like generic army dude as
Just
well.
like man.
Yeah, he does. He's just man under there. It just abysmal, to be honest. So that really is like, had to mention that. Another one, I mean, this last year really has kind of like burned me out on Marvel stuff, and part of that is like kind of my fault for watching so much of it. But then also, why are they like, they just oversaturated it? And I think they're aware now, because I think they are actually like restructuring their plans, because they're aware that like a lot of the audience doesn't. I think it's just not really working. There is such a thing as too much content, especially when you like have homogenized it. The one, funnily enough, that I enjoyed the least, and was maybe like should have been a bigger red flag, was Moon Knight. That was like the first of the Marvel Disney Plus series.
I actually watched 1 or 2 episodes of that.
Did you? It just felt like it felt like it kind of watched Legion and been like, oh, we're gonna try something like that, but like just nowhere near as interesting.
Yeah, and the character was very annoying, like very caricaturish, like, oh, here's a skittish nervous man.
Well, they do like explain that, but even then it was just like, oh okay, fine. I really didn't dig it. Not for me. And like, again, Ms. Marvel and She-Hulk, like, I also overall didn't love them, but they
My
at
favourite
least
thing, sorry, about She-Hulk is that it really reminds me of, like, do you know how in Futurama where they have that show called Single Female Lawyer?
Yes,
like, that's
that
exactly
literally,
what I think of.
No, same. Every single, because Bender sings like a made up version of the theme.
Yeah.
And every single time I was watching the show, that was playing in my head.
So funny. Like, genuinely, like, when I first saw it, I was like, is that like a joke? Like, is it a satirical thing? But
I mean, it's annoying because they have loads of jokes in it about how, because it breaks the fourth wall, about how like the main character wants it to be like this legal drama, but it just isn't at any point, and it would be way more interesting if it was, and I don't even really care for legal dramas. So don't get me wrong, I mean, I mentioned Better Call Saul is like one of my favourite shows ever, but that's like it done to like a masterful degree.
I think I can imagine they're talking legal dramas like The Good Wife and things like that.
Exactly. But yeah, Marvel in general, but Moon Knight in particular, that's the one that I'm like singling out.
Okay, fair.
Because I just like enjoyed all of it so little, whereas like She-Hulk and Ms. Marvel had moments of like, I was like digging it at points, but just like brief points. And then the other one that I would like to mention, again, I hadn't no real familiarity with the property, but I've just heard it mentioned because it's like from the 80s, and heard it like being discussed as like a thing that's being adapted, and I was following it for a while just in terms of like, from afar, being like, okay, well, I'm interested in seeing how this like pans out. Then it came out and got good reviews, so I was like, okay, like this is meant to be really good. I'll watch it. Started it, and I was like, okay, maybe it like, maybe it just takes a while to get good. Yeah, and I enjoyed like episode 2 a bit more than episode 1, and then episode 3 a little bit more. But still wasn't like loving it. But I was like, okay, there's like 10 episodes here, so like maybe by episode 10 it's going to be great. And then just no, it just and that is to actually tell you what it is. That's the Sandman.
Okay, I've heard very similar things. I
Really?
think my bestie watched it, and her best praise for it was alright. She was like, it's alright.
It just felt a bit too like whimsical and British and twee.
Is it Neil Gaiman?
Yeah, and I
Based
like
on Neil Gaiman, yeah.
I like I really like some of the stuff that he's done, but then like the more of his stuff that I like. Some of the stuff that he's done, I think the first stuff of his that I was exposed to, I was like, this is great. And then it feels like the more of his stuff that I see, the more I'm like, actually, maybe I don't like Neil Gaiman.
Do you know what? That's so funny because I've read, my bestie again has a book of his short stories, and they were really, really good. And then I was, there was a book by him, and I was like, oh, I like the short stories. I started to read the book, and I didn't finish it. It was god awful.
What was the book?
And I did exactly the same thing. Like, maybe I don't like Neil Gaiman. It was Everywhere, I think it's called.
Oh, okay. No, I have no like familiarity with it. I was just curious because I also had bought a Neil Gaiman book, and I've started it twice, and both times I've got like max 50 pages in, and I'm just like, I just don't care. I can't do this anymore.
100%. Like, you find yourself just skim reading or staring off into space.
Yeah, and then I'd be like, be reading it again, and I was like, I don't care what I've missed. The Sandman just it didn't do it for me, and it has such a great cast as well. And don't get me wrong, like I'm happy for it to be out there and do its thing. It got renewed for season 2, and it was like on the line, and I'm very happy for like the fandom because they seem to like eat it up. But yeah, sadly I think Neil Gaiman just ain't for me, and the Sandman was the nail in the coffin.
Yeah, very fair.
So yeah, those were like my biggest sort of like shows that I didn't enjoy. Just sort of quickly, obviously we have said that you said that you've got quite a few for this one. I know I've got quite a few for this one. I think we've got a few of them will come up already. What are your sort of hangover shows? What are the shows that you started last year that you will be watching? I imagine at least the first part of this year.
So obviously a big one for me was Midnight Mass, and I genuinely couldn't even tell you why I haven't finished watching it, because it was such like a lovely transition from the Midnight Club, which was not great. I was getting back into it, and I feel like Mike Flanagan's got such a specific kind of style and like just aesthetic and vibe to his work that I really enjoy. So this felt a lot more like kind of back to what I like about what I like about his shows. But yeah, I just haven't. I got to like a really intense moment as well. And
what bit or what episodes?
I can't remember the episode, but it was the point where it's been so long since I watched it, I can't even remember the character's name. It was the main guy went back into the kind of mess hall bit for his AA meeting, and the bad guy was there.
I thought, funnily enough, when you said that was exactly the bit I thought that it would have been.
Such a good moment as well, and I'm like, what happens? Like, does he die? Does he turn? Like,
I think that's the end of episode 4. Just like
could be. I think it's I reckon it was. I've only watched about 4 or 5.
So I think because there's only 8 episodes, I think you literally got halfway through, and then you're like, laying in the sands.
Exactly.
I'll leave you at the gate, and I'll come back for you, Midnight Mass.
I don't know whether it's generally like that moment was so good, but I'm like, what if it doesn't go well? Like, what if it's not as good as I want it to be, kind of thing.
Yeah.
It could be partly that, and then just partly laziness.
Fair. I feel that. I like, for what it's worth, I absolutely loved Midnight Mass.
I'm really, really enjoying it so far. I feel like the cast is amazing, especially the Reverend. He's great.
Yes, and he was in Legion, funnily enough.
Who was he in Legion?
He's in the first episode and the last episode. He's the guy who he gets like his face like burned, and then like the last episode just opens up with like his whole backstory just out of nowhere.
The guy in the pool.
You think he's dead, and then like the last episode's like, oh yeah, remember that character that we just like gave like no screen time, kind of killed off. Here's like his life.
Wow, I do remember that. Wow, we've come full circle.
I know, exactly.
Another one I wanted to mention that was so good. Again, these shows that I've got like 3 picks and then one that I would kind of go back to but not massively rate. But the first 3 are so good that I couldn't even tell you why I've stopped watching them. The other one is Only Murders in the Building.
Okay, not seen that, but heard very good things.
It's so good. The best way I think I could describe it is that it feels so like contemporary, but in such a fun, like it's very fun, it's pretty quirky, but it's like grounded in something really dramatic. Like there's
nice.
a murder in the building, obviously, that they live in, and they start a podcast about it.
Okay.
And it's just kind of that it's so good. The cast is amazing. It's Steve Martin, who I adore. I think he's so funny.
He is. He's brilliant.
Selena Gomez, who is a wee hidden gem.
Fair enough.
And then I feel terrible. Is it Martin Short?
That name rings a bell, so I think it is,
I don't have a huge amount of I don't have a huge amount of like exposure to his work. But he's very, very funny in it. Like it's another one of those ones that's like really well written. It's so clever. And yeah, it's contemporary, but doesn't feel like it doesn't feel cringy. Do you know that way that some kind of contemporary shows can?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
Have you, just out of curiosity, have you seen any of Wednesday?
No.
No, because my brother put
Is it like that?
I thought so. I mean, I'm not.
It's funny because there's been something stopping me watching Wednesday and I couldn't even tell you what it is. But there's been something where I've seen it and people are talking about it and I'm like,
it just isn't. It just very much isn't for me. I mean, I'm not really a Burton fan anyway, so like, it's not. It's not good. It's not drawing me in with that. But yeah,
and you're not going to get a better Wednesday Addams than Christina Ricci. Do you know?
No, exactly. No, I mean, I've heard Jenna's great, and from what I saw, she was really good. But it just the writing of the show in particular. Just felt very like, oh, we're like a contemporary show and we're going to reference Instagram and things like that. And it always weird because like I know that's like an actual, Instagram's used and people talk about it and stuff, but it always just feels so written when it's in like a show.
Yeah,
and someone
it's very jarring, isn't it?
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I'll
no worries. The other one I wanted to talk about, I've spoken to you kind of briefly about this, is Pepsi Where's My Jet?
Yeah, you did.
Which is a documentary series, and I felt like this was such a nice, like, obviously Netflix in particular is so saturated with like true crime documentaries, which I love, but there's only so much you can take, do you know what I mean, before you just need a little bit of like fun and happiness in your life. So this is such a nice like reminder that documentaries can be quirky and that they can be fun and that they can tell a serious story but like in a kind of funny way.
Yeah. Nice.
So yeah, that was definitely another one. I will definitely finish watching that. It's such a really that's the key to a good documentary though, isn't it? Like such a unique and funny story.
Yeah.
But yeah, that the way that they've done it as well, it's like it's such like a sprawling narrative, but it doesn't feel like it's stretched out.
Yeah, fair. That's a difficult thing to do. For it to not feel like, come on, get to the point.
Yeah, and it doesn't feel like it's, you know how when you watch some documentary series where they're like, this episode's about this, and this episode's about this. It's very much like all tied in a winner,
nice.
Which is nice. So yeah, those were my 3 kind of main ones. Another one I did want to finish just out of curiosity is Cabinet of Curiosities. And I feel like the more I've watched 3 episodes now, and I don't know, I'm getting more and more apprehensive the more I watch.
Yeah.
It's not what I wanted it to be. I think.
No.
I don't know. I feel like there's Del Toro vibes, but not. It's obviously not him, so it's not. He's got such a specific way to do it that it works.
Yeah.
And I feel like some of the episodes that I've seen anyway they just don't have it. Even the first one, which I think he did. I'm sure the one about the storage locker. It
was based on a short story he wrote, but it wasn't him. Or he didn't write or direct any of the episodes. I think 2 of them might be based on his short stories.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he's at the start of every episode. He like says hi.
True. I feel like what's really great about him is that he's got all these creatures and monsters and things, but he focuses on like the human aspect as well, which I feel like the episodes that I've seen anyway are kind of lacking. For me anyway, but I think just out of nosiness, I will keep watching it because I think there's only eight episodes.
Yeah, I mean, because it's an anthology one, I think it's like if there's one that you watch and it just strikes a chord, then like it's worth kind of watching for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, I think I said to you the last two episodes were the ones that really like they delivered the most. With the viewing in particular being the one that it just like struck such a chord. But and I knew that it was like a very singular chord, but at the same time I was like, I just wish it had been more of that sort of thing. Not like I don't mean more episodes like that episode. I just mean more episodes that you're watching it and you're like, this was so different to the other stuff that was in there.
Yeah.
Because I just think it would have been made for a much more interesting show, and I think that was what I had hoped for when I remember first reading about it and seeing all the like talent that was attached to it. I was like, okay, this is going to be great, because you had like the director of the Babadook, you had like obviously the director of Mandy, you had like David S. Goyer who wrote like I think he wrote the Dark Knight movies, so you had like really interesting like pools of talent all coming together, and it's just like why was it just not more distinctive apart from that one episode?
Yeah, which then felt so out of the blue, like even more distinctive. But
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so those are my choices. Again, like I'm sure there's a million and one other ones, but those are the ones again that kind of spring to mind.
Fair. Cool. Yeah, no, very good picks. Tragic picks at the same time for not having finished them, but like at least you do want to continue these series.
Yeah, they're on the radar.
Yeah, on the radar, on the list. I think mine are a lot more like for instance, probably top of my list is His Dark Materials. But I was watching, a bit of an episode from that like 2 days ago. When I was like on my way back, so I'm still very much like actively watching that show. And yeah, because I absolutely love. I don't know. Have you ever seen His Dark Materials? You ever read the books?
I've read the first book.
I read the books when like the movie came out back in like 2007, so I was like 12 and was like blown away by them.
It's the Golden Compass was the movie, is that right?
Yes, indeed, yeah. And the UK version of the book is called Northern Lights, I think. But yeah, I really, really loved the trilogy. And then when they announced that they were turning it into a TV series and like some of the talent that was attached, I was very excited. And I don't love it to the same degree that I'd hoped I would. It like there's something about it that's just a bit like. It's not bad. It just doesn't feel like it hits the height that it should. It just doesn't feel as interesting as its subject matter was. It just feels a little bit like. Sometimes I'm like, it just should be a bit more engaging, but at the same time, the performances, like Ruth Wilson is like unbelievably good in it, and it is also just really cool to see like them actually adapting these books that like. I mean, when the Golden Compass came out, they omitted so much of like this, the sort of like. I don't want to say subtext, but the text, because like it was obviously very anti-Catholic Church, anti-religion, and they were very scared by like what that would do to audiences. So it's nice to just see them actually like straight up adapt that stuff and lean into it. And again,
I love that as well because I hadn't read the book by this point, so when the Golden Compass came out, it literally from all of the ads just looked like it was about a polar bear. A polar bear in armor.
Yeah, they did neuter it a fair bit, didn't they? But yeah, no, so that's one that I'm going to continue. Another one is obviously I mentioned before that I was watching Rebels. That's, like I'm enjoying it fine. But I'm kind of just like at this point, I've like made a commitment to watch all these Star Wars shows. I'm like, I might as well. I do. The thing is, I enjoy them for the most part. Like Clone Wars in particular, I like took me so long and I was so not enjoying it, and then it started to get really good, which I'd always heard. I always heard it gets like really good further in, and by the end of it, I was like, that was a great show. And Rebels, the more I watch it, the more I'm like, yeah, I'm enjoying this. But at the same time, there's just something about it that, like, quite often, like I could have finished Rebels by now, but I'll quite often just go to watch it and then do something else instead because I'm like, I'm just kind of a bit.
Yeah,
I just kind of
do that thing where your brain, you pretend that you can't hear your brain, so you're like, oh no, I've clicked on something else. Exactly,
literally that. And yeah, part of me just kind of wants to be done with all these Star Wars shows so that I have seen them, and then I can watch all the new stuff and get all the references. But like I've done all the homework basically, and Rebels is like kind of the last like big one, so. I just need to persevere and push and get through
that's a fair slog that you've put in.
yeah, at this point, like I'm over the hill.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are like the two that I'm like actively watching. There's also Rick and Morty, which I think I've got one episode left, and then that's. I mean, again, it just finished there, so I'm not really that behind. And obviously, I mentioned Atlanta as well, which
Hmm.
phenomenal. But I just like behind on it, mostly because it was like Christmas and New Year, and I watched like nothing except for like a
Yep.
couple of movies with my family. There's actually one other one I want to mention, is the After Party, which I don't know if you've seen any or ever heard of. Came out like at the
Yep.
start of the year, and I actually started watching it when it came out, and then because there was so many other shows, it just kind of got like smothered. But I keep
Uh,
it's literally like I will see it written mentioned somewhere and be like, I need to get back and finish that. Because I only got like 3 or 4 episodes into it. No, I don't think there's that many episodes either. But it's by Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who did like Jump Street and the Lego Movie and Cloudy
okay.
with a Chance of Meatballs. And yeah, it's just like it's their kind of like sort of zany, irreverent comedy, and a sort of like murder mystery type show, where every
What was it
episode,
called? Sorry.
the After Party, where like every episode is centered on like a different character's telling of like where they were the night that like it all went down, and but every
Oh,
episode
cool.
has like a different style. Yeah, it got loads of
Oh,
like
I think you've mentioned that.
it got loads of acclaim when it came out. Basically, so loads of people like raving about it, and it even like cropped up in a few like TV shows of the year lists and stuff like that. And it's just literally like I was really digging it. It just got smothered. So it is one that
Hmm.
I'm like, okay, I will actually finish it this year. So yeah, that was my last big one. Moving on once again. Um, what are the ones of yours that got away over the last year? Obviously, we discussed ones that we started
Hmm.
and haven't quite finished. But what are the shows that you had maybe said to yourself, "Okay, I'm going to watch this show," and you just never got around to it, or yeah, was on your radar, or you saw and you were like, "Oh, I really, really need to like start that show," and you just weren't able to.
So the obvious one for me is Fleabag, which similar
I'm
to
glad
Hill
I'm glad
House.
that's made the list.
Yeah, similar to Hill House, it's very much you've been asking me to watch it for a good while now, and I at this point
It's
we've
so
joked
good.
about it before. It's becoming a personality trait
Yeah. Who will
that
you
I
be once
don't
you've seen
ever
it?
haven't watched it exactly. Um, and again, I couldn't tell you why. I think I was thinking about it just there. Like, I think part of the reason I maybe don't watch these shows is just sheer laziness. Like, if I have to hunt for it, I'm probably not going to watch it.
It's on
Which is
Amazon Prime
terrible.
and iPlayer, I'm sure. It's on
Yeah,
like
but
two
I
things
don't
that you can watch.
regularly go on Prime. Like, I'd need to go out of my way to go into Prime. If
Fair
it's not
enough.
on Netflix or Disney Plus, I'm probably not going to watch
Fair
it
enough. Well, I'll put
because
words in.
I'd have to press another button to get onto to Amazon.
Fair.
Um,
But I think
but
that
yeah, I don't. It is something that I do want to watch. I've heard so much good things about it, but
the funniest thing about that for me is that it's so short as well. Like it's so small. To put it in perspective, I'm pretty sure I read the entire like first series scripts because I was given a book for my birthday last year of like they've done like the entire series like seasons 1 and 2 as like a book that's just like all the scripts, and it
that's
was
cool.
one of my case studies from a major project, so I was like, well, I'll read the scripts. And I basically read the entire first season on one plane. Like that's how like that's reading it
But
as
where were
well,
you
which
going?
takes longer.
Where
I
was
was
the plane
coming
going?
coming back from Cambodia, but it was like one of the flights. It wasn't like all of. I did 4 flights, and it's just one of them
Okay, fair.
that I like was actually watching Fleabag, reading Fleabag for. So it's very like it's like that's yeah. I'd like I'll be kind of be sad the day that you do watch it.
I know.
And it's
I've
one.
gotten to that stage now where it's just more funny not to watch it. Do you know what
Yeah,
I mean?
yeah. I mean, thing is, like, it was one that I'd heard nothing but amazing things about for so long, and then I watched it and just like inhaled it, and then was kind of like immediately sad because I was like, oh, like I won't get to go through that again now. Like I've done it.
Maybe that's why I'm just the anticipation of what going to watch it is just more fun than my life will be after it. So that's my justification. Um, Another one that I think came out last year was that 1899.
Yep, I know what you
Um,
mean.
this is
Um,
one that I didn't know a lot about. I've kind of like obviously you're very much into like going into things blind, so I've kind of adopted that over the course of the year. So Yeah, I don't know a huge amount about it. I just know that it was getting a lot of like traction and stuff. I
Um,
think I think again
sorry.
that's laziness that I know that I'll need to concentrate to watch it.
Yeah, you very much do. Let me give you one piece of information about the show.
Okay,
It has just been cancelled. So,
amazing.
so
So what
thanks,
better time to
thanks
watch
for
it?
not watching it, Kathryn. You
Damn
contributed to
it.
that. I would say, to be honest, I had a lot of hype going in for it, like a lot of hype, because it's from the creators of a TV series called Dark. And I would say, like, I have another friend who was the one that first recommended Dark to me, and he watched 1899, and me and him like had like a bit of a back and forth while watching it because we both were like we kind of like overtook each other at various points while watching it, so we were both had to
Okay.
be like careful of spoilers, but also like give our honest opinions on it, and we both kind of walked away with the same sort of feelings, which is just like it just didn't we didn't feel it quite worked. It kind of
Okay.
felt like it was trying to emulate a lot of what Dark did, and it did. There were some like interesting ideas and stuff, and there's some good moments. Overall, it just didn't quite land, in the way that it felt it should have. It would have been interesting to see what like they had planned for it, to
Mhm.
see where like it was going to go, because I don't doubt that they had some mental like plan. But I would very much say if you're going to watch if you're gonna watch something in that vein, just watch Dark, because Dark is like
Okay.
about as good as TV gets as well. Like it is like a phenomenal series. It's 3 seasons, longer than Fleabag, but still not that long. And
Give me a show
it
that's 19 seasons and I'll watch that before I watch
yeah,
Fleabag.
so longer is the better.
Yeah.
But yeah, just I mean I'd say this to everyone, but just if you do watch Dark, just make sure that you like because you have to go out your way to do it. But make sure that you put it into German with subtitles rather than
Okay.
watching the
I
dub.
would I wouldn't watch a dubbed one.
Yeah. No,
Anyway.
it's just because like Netflix like stealth puts the dub on,
Mm.
and I know someone that was watching it and they didn't realize it was a German show and it was dubbed until they were like 3 episodes in, and then they were like, well now I don't want to watch the German. I'm now used to like the dub,
Yeah.
but they never really connected with the show, and I remember watching an episode with them, and I was like, oh my god, like it actually destroys it because there's so much like
Oh
sort of
really?
subtlety. Yeah, the German had so much in terms of like tone, and the performances are really sort of subtle and understated. There's a lot of just like yeah, and the way that, even like the way that they speak and they deliver their lines, there's like a sort of gruffness to it and stuff. And then you put
Mhm.
on the dub, and it's these like bright American
Oh
voices
no.
that are so in contrast to like the performance that what it makes it, what it then does is it totally kills. Like you then don't notice the subtlety of the performance because it's so at odds with like how in your face the dub is, that
Uh huh.
you kind of like you can't really you can't you'd literally it'd be literally like trying to tell yourself that you are listening to a different person than you're watching. You just can't really wrap your head around it in like live time. So all that it does
Uh huh.
is it just makes everything feel really overacted. And yeah, again, so much of its strength lies in like the performances are so good.
Yeah.
And the more you watch it, the more you like appreciate just like how good the performances are and how like well cast it is and everything. But yeah, like it's yeah. Sorry to like absolutely shoot down your
That's okay.
1899
um,
plans.
and then another one I have, I think we've kind of spoken about it briefly. Another one I want to watch is Killing Eve,
Okay,
but
yeah,
the reason I haven't is because I've heard that it doesn't. The further it goes on, the worse it gets, like
yeah.
noticeably.
I've I've heard the
Have you
same
seen it?
thing. No, I've seen a bit at the start,
Mm-hmm.
and again, I think it's one of those things that like if I watched it again, I'd probably really enjoy it. I just don't think I was in the right like hit. Like I don't know what it was. Just something about it wasn't clicking for me. But
Uh-huh.
it's Phoebe Waller-Bridge, I'm sure, that created the show, and she obviously did Fleabag, and I've heard it like
Nah, I'm not
mentioned
gonna
as
watch Killing Eve then.
exactly. Well, I mean, you've got that. I've got that. I've still got Killing Eve to watch myself. But yeah, I've heard the same as you because I think it finished last year, didn't it? And
Yeah.
I
So that's
remember,
kind of why I'm nervous. Like, is are the first few seasons going to be good enough to warrant watching it all? Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I think it's one of those that I think I will watch at some point and just make my own mind up because there's not
mhm.
too much of it. But it's yeah, it's not. I can't put it too high because I've got the same apprehension you do.
Yeah, yeah. That was the kind of three that jumped out for me.
Fair. Fair. I like your picks. Obviously, I'm interested to touch base in a year and see where you're at with them. Yeah, mine were all kind of ones that I'd mostly kind of ones that I thought would maybe end up doing a podcast on, and then just kind of never happened. Because again, they're ones that I know very little about, but I've just heard great things. First top of the list was Lovecraft County, I think it's called, which I think is just like, again, like individual standalone episodes. I think it is like the same characters in each, but I think it is just like contained episodes rather than doing like a sort of serialized thing. But I just heard like I remember like, I think it came out in like 2021 or 2020, and just remember seeing like loads and loads of like praise for it. So I've always just been like, okay, well that's absolutely on my list of things to watch, but I've just never got round to it. And again, it is one of those as well that I've not seen it on any streaming platform, so I think that also has contributed to, well, I don't immediately know where I can get it, so it can sit further back. Another one that I actually do know where this one I can find is, but again, I started watching it with someone and was like, okay, this is okay, I'm not loving it, but I've heard nothing but like amazing things about it, and that's I May Destroy You. So yeah, that it came out. I think like I can't even remember if it came out towards the end of a year, but I just remember like getting to the end of the year that it came out on, and like loads of websites, and loads of people I knew, like talking about their favorite shows of their year and saying like that was their like by far their favorite show that year, and it's just always been one where I'm like, okay, well I've just heard like unanimously amazing things about this series, so I do need to like sit down and watch it properly. So those were the two that I kind of had thought would make it into like podcast form at some point, but it just never panned out. Probably because like we ended up doing a lot more like topical ones as well, as we were going, which I think was like a better move. The last one I've got, sticking to threes, was one that has like only literally just come on my like to watch list, because I think the second series has just dropped, and that's been getting like outstanding amounts of praise. And I remember the first series coming out and it getting like, getting like positive buzz, but I was just kind of like, nothing. From what I know about the show, nothing jumps out at me as like, oh, I have to see this. But season 2 is just like, I've seen like such like ridiculous ravings that I'm like, okay, I need to watch this, and that's I Hate Susie.
Oh yes, Billy Piper.
Yeah, it is, and yeah, so I mean, like the first season came out and it was getting like strong reviews and stuff, but I was just like, okay. But then like season 2, I've just seen people be like, it's one of the greatest things ever made. I'm like, okay, like that's such like exactly, that's such a leap that I'm like, okay, well, I think season 2 is only like 3 episodes as well. I don't know if that was just like 3 episodes had just been released when I checked, or if it's only 3 episodes. But yeah, I'm like, okay, well, there's not a lot of it, and it's meant to be very, very good. So I'll give it a go.
Fair, very fair.
Thank you. So yeah, those are my 3 picks. And then lastly, to wrap the whole thing up, it wouldn't be New Year without some resolutions. So yeah, what are the shows that are coming out this year that you are looking forward to, that are on your to watch list, that will end up taking place over Fleabag and the other shows that we've mentioned?
So one, of course, I don't know if you'll have this one on your list as well, but it's Mike Flanagan, our main man Flanagan's new show. What's it? The Fall of the House of Usher.
That's right. Yeah, that doesn't really roll off the tongue.
Not a catchy title.
No. Yeah, you could have like redrafted that one.
Yeah, but I've again purposely chosen not to read much about it. But from the kind of like a cover picture thing that I saw, it looks very much in line with like Midnight Mass and the Hill House and things like that. So that's the more that he can produce of that, the more I want. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I'm with you. I'm very much with you.
That's 100% what I'm all about. Yeah, in terms of like other shows that I want to watch this year, I mean, the one resolution, of course, would be keep up with new shows. But well, I feel like we kind of spoke about this again with like movies and stuff, but there's a few shows like big things that I feel like are very much like culturally significant that I just haven't seen.
Yeah.
One of them that we've spoken about before is The Twilight Zone.
Yeah. I'm
I
with
feel
you
like
then.
I now have access to it, so I
Running out
can.
of excuses.
I know I definitely am, and I don't think they're massively long,
No,
um,
they're not.
and it's very much like you can just kind of drop in and out and watch episodes as and when. So yeah, that's kind of on my list for just like why not now kind of
Yeah,
thing.
fair.
Um, Another one, funnily enough, you've spoken about it a lot in the podcast, but I just saw that it had come on to a specific streaming platform, and that is Atlanta.
Nice.
Because you've spoken about that for a while now, and you've hummed and hawed about having a podcast
Yeah.
based on it. So yeah, I think that'll definitely be on the list for this year. And then the last thing I wanted to watch this year, again, this is kind of again something that you've mentioned in one of our friends from the course. I remember him mentioning it a lot. Is and you mentioned it in the podcast. What We Do in the Shadows,
Yeah.
because it's again something out of laziness I've not really had access to. Um, so yeah, I feel like I'll appreciate your sense of humor. Um, so I'm definitely eager to give that a watch, and yeah, I feel
I'm
like that'll
actually,
be a good
speaking
show.
of, I'm actually behind on that show. I think I've started season 3 and now season 4 is finished. So that is actually one that I need to catch up on myself. And again, it's just one of those that like I really enjoy it, but it's just not. There's other shows that have just like demanded more attention. It's just been an easier
Yeah.
one to like neglect. I think as well because I know that it's really good and I know that it's just kind of there waiting. I'm kind of like
Mm-hmm.
happy to just tackle it whenever.
Yeah, I think sometimes there's like such a almost like a pressure to keep up to date with like obviously you work like in the industry, so I don't know how much chat there is about like TV and that. Like there's people in my office as well. Like they're very much up to date on their
Yeah.
TV. So if you want to watch something, you need to watch it as and when it's coming out, which kind of puts things like What We Do in the Shadows and Twilight's on that on the back burner because you need to keep up to date with these things, or you'll
Exactly.
fall behind so
No,
quickly.
exactly. That is a big part of it. Is like people do discuss these shows as and when they come out, and yeah, it just. I mean, again, that's a big part of like why. I mean, me keeping up to date with or catching up with all the all the Star Wars shows and stuff has been because like I have loads of friends that like obsessively watch all that stuff, and even like in work I've been around people and they've been having conversations about them, so there is like
Yeah.
incentive for me to watch these things because it's like, well, it means I can participate in these like conversations. But yeah, as a result, I mean that's a part of the reason as well that I made an effort to just like keep up to date with TV, being at uni as well, but keeping up to date with TV in 2022, and again I do intend to in 2023. However, from the look I had on like the year ahead with TV shows, it doesn't look like there's the same degree of like overwhelming amounts of content. I mean, that again could change because there'll always be things that come out of nowhere that just blindside you and that you end up watching that you expect to. Probably other things that just haven't cropped up on lists. But I mean, I still had like quite a few as is. The big one, which is just about to drop, I think in 10 days' time, or about to start in 10 days' time, is The Last of Us, because the video game is phenomenal.
Oh,
And
yeah, I've seen it advertised.
yeah, and you know, video game adaptations, as we've discussed, generally tend to be way more miss than hit. But
Yeah.
this one is created by Craig Mazin, who did the Chernobyl TV series, which I don't know if you've seen. It
I did.
is
Amazing.
really, really good. So I have quite a lot of faith, actually, especially because Neil Druckmann, who was like the sort of lead creative designer of the games, he's involved. I think he's directed some of the episodes. They've even had like some other TV directors that I've seen other stuff of theirs and like enjoyed, and they've come on. The casting of Bella Ramsey and Pedro Pascal, not at all what I would have expected. And at first, you know, I was a bit like, oh, I don't really know if that's right. But the more I sort of see of them, the more of like I'm like, okay, it feels like they've actually gone with actors that they think, you know, the more I see them in action, the more I'm like, okay, you're actually embodying the spirit of the character rather than just like looking and sounding exactly like the character. And that's way more, you should be doing that. You're doing like a live action version of the character rather than just doing like a straight up, let's turn the pixels into like human form. Because I think, you know, we've had that so many times with video game films and it just doesn't really work. So I'm glad that they're taking like some creative liberties, but for the most part they do seem to be sticking quite strictly to the source material and faithfully so. So I've got high hopes. It could end up being terrible, but I actually, despite myself, I'm very, very like excited to see what they do with it, and I hope it delivers because it definitely has the potential to.
Fair.
another one that's a very different show that I know very little about, but I'm just kind of like curious about, is Velma. Um, as in like Velma from
As in
Scooby Doo.
Scooby Doo.
Yeah, it's Mindy Kaling, I think.
As
Is like
yes, actually, I remember that. I remember there being a whole big drama.
yeah, because I think she's
about
like
it when it
a
was-
lesbian, and it's like meant to be like a
Yeah.
more adult series. So yeah, like again, it might I might watch an episode of it and be like, this is trash. It's not for me. But
Did you ever watch the Mindy Project?
no,
The first few seasons of the Mindy Project were amazing.
really
Like, so funny. She's such a funny woman.
good.
So
Well,
there's hope.
yeah, no, I'm like as a thing. I'm yeah again cautiously optimistic, and you never really know what's going to be good and what's not.
Yeah.
But
You
it's
don't want it to fall into that trap that we were talking about where it just... Do you know what I mean?
yeah.
So it's on dangerous territory, so...
Exactly. But no, yeah, I'm intrigued by it. I'm just I'm curious to see what they do with it, because I think I do have a lot of love for Scooby Doo. I think most humans do.
Of course,
so.
we spoke about the movies.
Yeah,
At
exactly.
length. One of the podcasts.
Exactly. So, I could do with some more good Scooby Doo in my life. Other ones on my list are Nolly. Just because it's Russell T Davies, to be honest, I know like nothing about it. But after It's a Sin, then I'll watch anything he puts out. On that tangent, obviously Doctor Who is on my list, especially with him coming back for the specials, and it being the show's 60th anniversary. So,
is that from initial air date or
initial air date? Yeah.
Yeah.
But 60 years is like a hell of a feat for. I think James
Very
Bond
fair.
did its 60th anniversary last year, so it's like just behind
Yeah,
James
that's
Bond.
crazy to think about, isn't it?
Exactly, and then I think the next major thing that gets like a 60th anniversary like towards the end of this like decade is Star Trek, because obviously there's just not tons of things that like last that long, but yeah, thankfully
It's like Corey.
yeah,
I don't know what it's sitting at.
I don't think
them all.
yeah I know I actually that a podcast for another time. It's going to soaps.
Oh God.
I know a couple of other ones that I had were Fallout, which you had like brought to my attention before as being like Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy. So I am quite interested in that just because of the caliber of talent attached, not because I have any like attachment to the video game series because I don't play them. Clone High, which was like an animated series that Lord and Miller put out forever ago. I think it was like one of the first things they ever did, and I think it got cancelled. Never seen it, but again, I love their like sort of style. So I'm interested in seeing what they do with it. There's a lot of Star Wars shows coming out, which I've like almost caught up on like the other stuff, so I like now have to watch no matter what because I can't do this.
Fall behind again.
Exactly, I know what that's like. And then
I love that you weren't even behind. Like you were watching it as and when they were coming out, and somehow it felt like you were behind. Do you know what I mean?
I had 7 seasons of Clone Wars and 4 seasons of Rebels and that to watch, so I did have like some catching up to do. And then the last one I wanted to mention, which also comes out this month, or starts this month anyway, is Poker Face. Have you heard of? No? So I've not really seen much in the way of advertising for it, to be honest. But I think it's because it's coming out on Peacock, which I don't even know. Like, what's the UK Peacock? Where do you get that, or is it just like?
Not a clue.
Yeah,
it's like up there with Hulu. Like, what's that?
Yeah. These things just don't exist to us. So I don't know how I'll watch it. Probably not legally, but like if they're not going to release it in the UK, then
what's a gal to do?
Exactly. Don't you force my hand, Peacock.
This is on you.
Yeah, these feathers are on your hands. But yeah, it's a detective series, which again is like individual episodes, but with just like the same lead character. Stars Natasha Lyonne, who is just terrific, and it's created by Rian Johnson, who obviously did the Knives Out movies. So
of course,
so I feel like it's
he does a good murder mystery.
Exactly, I feel like it's a lot of very good, very talented people doing very talented things, releasing it in a very obscure place. So 2 out of 3 ain't bad. But yeah, so that's another one that I'm very curious to see how it's good, if it's any good. Those are my New Year's resolution shows.
I like it. I'm gonna have to go through and watch this after it's been edited to like write down all your suggestions as well.
I'll just send you my notes.
Yeah, that would probably be easier.
But yeah, thank you as ever, Kathryn, for your time.
No
That was
worries.
another
Thank
very,
you.
very lengthy podcast, but we did have an entire year to discuss.
It was lengthy, but do you know that way as I was writing my notes for it, I was getting more and more excited to discuss everything.
Yeah, and you brought up a lot of stuff that I didn't expect, which was nice, and a lot of unexpected ways as well. So yeah, I'm glad we had the discussion that we did.
Yeah, it was very good. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, I'm very excited to see where both of us stand a year from now with our various TV shows.
I'll probably have rewatched Greys or Criminal Minds or something equally as trash.
I'll probably still be catching up on a Star Wars show, so don't worry.
Yeah, fair.
The sober predictions. Anyway, let's wrap things up there. Thank you once again, Kathryn. Obviously, we have 2 episodes left now of series 2, and both of them are yours. So I'm excited to see. I know I'm excited to see how you wrap things up. We've obviously discussed the content episodes, and I'm very excited for that. So, yeah, I'll see you when I see you, and to all you who watched, thank you and farewell.
See you guys.